Welcome to DomiNations. My name is Mark, and today we'll take a closer focus to the question, which is probably the most frequently asked question below my videos. Paradoxically, it is the most basic and probably also the most complex question: how to make loot in the best way. So at this point, we are facing a very fundamental issue. If we are talking about such things like loot, or even more dangerously, much loot and little loot. So there are players which comprehension of about loot is simply to attack in the multiplayer. Some other ones are understanding or associating with the word loot to gain a specific amount of resources which are necessary for some researches or even for some upgrades. At least there are also such players like mine, which are understanding or associating with loot to gain as many resources as possible with the smallest amount of invested time and effort, which is nothing else than the principle of efficiency. At least looting is nothing else than in real life your finances, because it is like an accounting. There is no sense in having a lot of income if you are losing a lot of, and so in total you are only having a sum or a resulting amount of resources or finances which are very small or even negative. So I think over here we all should have gained at least a basic idea about why this topic is so personal or so subjectively influenced. Now later on in this video we will talk about some very general and basic types of strategies how to attack and how to loot. Probably out there you are a quite newer player, so a player with not that much of experience and time in the game. So it is pretty important to try at least all of these attack strategies and see what is personally best fitting your own current status in the game. Only to make some examples. I mean, if you have to see your own troops retraining, seeing a lot of time before you can use them again, can be pretty nasty. And I know some players which are in the situation that they are telling, this is the worst situation for me. I hate watching my own troops retraining. It is a completely loss of time. Other players probably are in a hugely active alliance where players are chatting, discussing, communicating inside the game or on other side platforms, but they are talking about DomiNations, so time is flying and there is no problem for them to stay active meanwhile and see their troops retraining. Other players have really a lot of they really don't like to drop their own medals. If they got too high in medals and have to get lost of them by simply dropping some troops to the enemy base and then, for example, leaving the battle to gain or to get to a lower league, it is really nasty and really boring to them. At least also some players, which I would call or count myself to, it is pretty embarrassing to retrain the own troops and to permanently get a new army composition. So to train my Worldwar troops, to train multiplayer troops, Worldwar, multiplayer, and I'm not a fan of this kind. So to give the full video a real sense, it is important for yourself to find out which of these strategies is really fitting for you and whether you are an active or an inactive player, which we'll see on later. Then you can differentiate and understand whether the tips I will give at the very end of the video are fitting for yourself or whether they are not fitting for yourself. The later on shown attack strategies will refer to this. So let's start with the first actual topic of this video. It's about the time-effort paradoxon. So if you are attacking and want to make loot, you will have to use your own troops, whereby your troops, all troops you have dropped, will die within the battle if you are unable to destroy all enemy defense buildings, which means you either have to decide to drop only a little amount of troops and not all of yours, being sure that all of them will die, or other ways, you will have to drop most or even all of your troops with the intention to destroy all enemy defense towers and therefore get your troops back alive. Let's come to a pretty essential part of this video. In the end, there will be some recommendations and tips from me for you as player, but
How should you know which of these recommendations and tips are fitting for you? So a lot of them are based on the assumption or on the assessment whether players are playing actively, so-called, or more passively. And this activity cluster is just not to
devalue or denounce some players as more actively or less actively. It is simply to get a better opinion for yourself whether you are part of the more actively playing community or the more passively and less active playing community, part of the community. Let's talk about the graph in the background. First, at the x-axis, we have the differentiation between whether you are playing frequently or even more rarely. So for example, playing for about 10 minutes in some a day, 30 minutes a day, 40, 1 hour, 1.5, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours even a day. At the y-axis, we have the differentiation whether you are playing continuously or more sporadically, getting offline in between. So without any personal rating of myself, if we are just talking about efficiency, most obviously it is beneficial to be somewhere over here. So this means to be a player which is highly and frequently active, so let's say for about 2 up to 4 or 5 hours a day. And when he is active, then he is active for a bunch of time. So not for 10 minutes, 20 times a day, but for 4 hours and probably, let's say, all 4 hours just in one piece. So if this player is farming, he is getting loot, loot, loot. There is income in loot, income in loot, income in loot. He can spend the loot and afterwards go offline. Meanwhile, while he is online and he has a lot of loot stored, no enemy player can attack him due to the fact that he is continuously, without any gap, online. So from efficiency side, that would be most beneficial, and therefore I differentiated the graph in the most obvious 4 quarters, and the right top quarter therefore is marked in green, and we have also 2 quarters marked in yellow and 1 quarter marked in red, just only related to the efficiency opinion behind. So at this point about activity, we can most obviously summarize that it is beneficial to be online frequently and continuously. Even if you are not online that frequently, probably you are able for yourself to take at least 30 minutes, I don't know, before work, after work, in the evening, to stay online continuously, and then rating using, for example, a trainings blessing, and making your own game style or style of playing more efficient. Now, following attack strategies are not about attacking with 3 bombers, 2 planes and 7 infantries, or 4 bombers, 7 infantries and 2 wall miners. It is just generally about which underlying strategies there are and what are their pros and also what are their cons. The first attack strategy hereby is the most common as well as most intuitive one. Just take your Worldwar composition you feel most comfortable with and you have probably also adapted your museum for to get the highest boosts. Inevitably, this army composition is just made to win battles in Worldwar. So you will also get some stars, earn stars when you are attacking enemy bases with those troops. And if you don't want to lose those troops, you need to get rid of all defense buildings. While getting rid of all defense buildings, inevitably you will just destroy as such many other buildings that you will get at least the 50% star, probably even the quick victory star, the town center, and in some cases even 75% or the 5th star. This means in total you will get in 99.999% of all cases 1 up to 4 stars, and for the long run this will mean that you will gain some medals and get higher in leagues. The only exception to this, which is known to me, is the commando attack strategy. Commando troops are focusing for enemy buildings and therefore will destroy them first. After having destroyed all enemy defense buildings, your troops are completely safe, so they are not dying when leaving the battle, and in approximately 95% of all bases, the defense buildings have that little hit points compared to all other buildings that you will end up below 50% when destroyed all defense buildings. So now you can use your planes and other troops to raid the resources from that base and leave the enemy base with at least 70, 80, 90, in some cases even 100%, staying below 50% destruction and so having earned no stars, which will in total not result in it. Strategy number 2 is about dropping only a little amount of troops, and so with the intention to not lose significant parts of your army while getting some resources and at least dropping your medals due to the fact that you are entering a battle and leaving it just without getting any stars. In long term, most obviously, this will result in a decrease of your own medals and league. The more inactive the enemy hereby is, the more resources of him or her are exposed inside the production buildings outside of the base and not inside the storage buildings. Another possibility simply is just only to drop one troop and then immediately leave the battle without any focus for getting resources. Attack strategy number 3 is specially composed to raid, so using raiders, probably wall sappers, so all troops which are only focusing for economic buildings. In total, this will also result in a decrease of medals. Strategic number 4 yet is existent, but nevertheless it's a really special case and we will not talk about in further detail over here. It is just using special air units such as bombers and transporters to raid specific enemy resources, being aware and accepting that those troops inevitably will die because you will be unable to destroy all enemy defense buildings with them. So the retrain costs and the time to retrain will be pretty high over here, and if you are not paying attention and having a good museum, this can easily result in some kind of negative accounting. Now we've talked about and received a more detailed view at what basic or general attack strategies there are and how they are affecting in long-term view for your own medal count as well as the leagues you are currently and later on in. But what are the actual results from being in higher and lower leagues? So the results which are not that much recognizable currently, but in long term, that we will talk about now. The primary consequence of being in higher leagues and higher medal ranges is that we mostly or more often will be confronted in matchmaking system with active players. So such ones which have high level defenses, a lot of research, high level generals. The generals are active at the castle. We have donated troops in the town center. All traps are triggered and we have even blessings active. So in total, to sum it up, if we attack those enemies, we have a really high likelihood of losing all of our troops and therefore having high effort in time in retraining our troops. In case of defense, being in high medal ranges can give you some opportunity. So for example, enemy attackers will focus for you getting stars at your base and not at resources. This means you have the opportunity to expose your own town center, which means there will be a lot of enemy attackers being grateful for having the opportunity to attack in a town center which is nearly undefended. And they will take the town center, get even the quick victory stars. Yeah, they will also steal you some trade goods. But afterwards, there is a high chance that they will leave your base without destroying your active blessings and without getting any loot at all, which is giving you a peace treaty. From loot perspective, proportionally to how high your league or your medal count is, resources get less and less important, so that players high in medals often expose their resource buildings, and therefore it's pretty easy to get them if you are focusing for those resource buildings while being on yourself on high medals. In opposition to this, it's pretty easy to guess what are the results of medal decrease, so being in low medal ranges. Enemies will be more likely inactive, it will be low level bases, there will be traps triggered, probably no town center defenders, no generals on the castle, so the general likelihood for being able to crush those bases without tremendous losses or even loss of your complete army are high. So the training costs for your army should be lower in lower ranks of medals. At the other hand, advantages always come with disadvantages. So being in a low medal range will also make you matched with other players which are also on purpose in a lower medal range. And this most obviously also for loot. So those players attacking you will also focusing for your loot and not for the town center. The likelihood or the possibility for enemy players getting some, at least a lot, probably all of your loot without any star, leaving your base and making it able to attack exactly and directly for the next one is a huge disadvantage where you can loot it by other players multiple times in only a very short period of time. Let's come to the recommendations and tips section of the video. Now, if you are a player which is probably located in the green square of our activity chart over here, it totally doesn't matter which strategy you drive, because being active and probably being active for a huger time a day and probably even without gaps, so continuously, will just simply don't make you to lose a lot of resources due to the fact that enemies can't attack you, or when they attack you, your resources mostly are depleted due to the fact that you used them when you were active. So it is only about trying different strategies, or probably all of them which I have mentioned out, and see what are the exact benefits or even disadvantages of those, and what of those strategies are most preferable for your current situation and status where you feel most comfortable with. At the other hand, being an inactive player, there are two essential tips I can highly recommend to you. First, I have already mentioned in the activity cluster part of the video, is about try to be as continuous as possible online. So even if there are only 30 minutes of being active and online a day, try to get them continuous in just one piece without a gap. Because if you are attacking and making, for example, 500,000 loot, getting offline and getting looted by about 300,000, in sum, you will just only keep 200,000, and this will make your accounting way worse than if you could loot a complete amount of needed resources, getting offline, and all enemies which are matchmade to you only see you with very depleted storages which are not attractive to attack. Secondary, increasing and not on purpose dropping your own medals while exposing your own town center to provoke enemies to give you peace treaties is also pretty valuable, due to the fact that those resources which you have stored are conserved for a long time if you get peace treaties while those hours a day where you are actually inactive. At least as inactive player, your own defense, more specifically the strength of your own defense is depending and making the difference in losing a lot of resources while being offline, or losing a less amount of resources. So definitely recommendation, if you are not an active player, rushing is not valuable for you. It is more valuable to max your buildings out and therefore making your accounting more positive when being inactive, and enemies which are matchmade to you while you have resources stored being unable to catch those. In total, I hope the video was informative as well as entertaining as always. So if you have any opinions or issues, just leave me a comment below. Your DomiNation tips.